I was wrong about Lovable, and I am man enough to admit it. A few weeks back, I put out a video where I tried to vibe code the same app in V0, Replit, and Lovable. And if you watch that video, you know Lovable failed miserably to the point that it could not actually build the app. So with the recent release of Lovable 2.0, I thought I'd give it another try. And to be honest, I was actually kind of impressed. But impressed with what exactly? If you followed me for a while, first off, thank you. But if you followed me for a while, you know that I don't really think any of those tools like Replit, like V0, like Lovable, like Bolt are really at a point yet where you can build complicated full stack applications beyond a prototype stage. They're great for super minimal MVPs where there's not a lot of complexity. So to me, these tools really fit into step 3 of my 4-step vibe planning process. Now, I've done a few videos recently on this process, and I have a much longer 3 to 4 hour long form tutorial coming to my free school group in early May. But let me recap it real quick for the uninitiated. If you want to win with vibe coding, you need to spend a lot of your time vibe planning, meaning first you need to architect your solution, meaning what's all of the tech that's actually involved. And then you need to get a really detailed understanding of each feature you're going to have and what the requirements of those features are and how it needs to function. Only then do you start actually designing out what you want this thing to look like. And so trying to do all of those 3 steps at once is a recipe for disaster because LLMs can only handle so much context. And so in the real world, 75% of the development process takes place in the planning stage. And so our vibe coding process really shouldn't be any different. So in this video, we're going to break down my top 5 tips for vibe designing beautiful UIs inside of Lovable. And most of these tips actually come from learning from my previous failures with Lovable specifically. And so my promise to you in this video is that if you don't already get wow factor type designs out of your work with Lovable, then you're going to be a major step closer after watching this video. And so I'm going to go through each of these tips in detail, breaking down what exactly it is, how exactly it works, and why exactly you should care. So this video is going to be perfect for you if, number 1, you already vibe code with any of these tools and you just want the outputs to start getting nicer. Number 2, you already have a pretty concrete vibe coding process, maybe with tools like Cursor and Windsurf. Maybe you use one of these other tools somewhere in the process and you really just love learning about ways to do those things even better. Or 3, maybe you've already got some design chops and you're just wondering how you can force multiply yourself on the product design side of things. But let me be clear about one thing before I start. Mastering this skill is a non-negotiable because quality user experience and user interface is a subconscious authority builder, and people trust authorities. It's actually a part of our evolutionary psychology. So when people trust you, they are more likely to buy from you, and they're more likely to stick around longer with your tool, aka considerably higher customer lifetime value when you have strong user experience. So all that to say, let's get into it with our first tip, giving the system our aesthetic guidelines. What I mean here is that we need to tell Lovable what we consider to be something that is designed well. And so this takes 2 forms really. Number 1, overarching design principles, and number 2, giving inspiration of things that we think conform to those principles. So it's really no different than how we would work on prompting LLMs in any other case, really. We're telling it what our guidelines are and examples of things that follow those guidelines. So what I've done in order to do that, and you can get this, by the way, for free inside of my school group, I have the prompts. I went out and spent a lot of time asking ChatGPT, asking Claude, watching YouTube videos from actual product designers, and I tried to synthesize what actually makes a FANG style, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, right? A big tech company. What makes their designs so great? Like, what are the actual principles that they follow. And then I just built them into a set of guidelines that I can give to the language model anytime I want to design something. So why do we do that? Well, it forces Lovable to solve the problem with all the tools that it has within the context of our constraints of what we consider to be good. And I will show you actually a very direct contrast of what it looks like with this and without this when we get to tip number 3. And so basically what we want to do is as follows. And so we can take some of the outputs from that step number 2 of that 4-step process that I was talking about earlier, which I will link around somewhere in this video, a video where I go through this whole piece. But we want to take this first piece where we have a really clear idea of what the feature's goal is and what the detailed feature requirements of that actually is or are. So we have all of this copied. We hop back into Lovable. And then basically what we're going to do is inside of the prompt that we have, which again, you can find a link for this below the video. We have all of these different things that we're going to go through in a second. But one section that we have in here is called App Overview, Feature Context. So we're going to paste in this entire section that we have. This entire section, we just pasted it in right here into feature context. And so it's going to go through, we're going to tell it what screens we want built. So I want you to build the splash screen, the registration screen, and one of the onboarding screens. And then I've also uploaded a few images of other apps that I just like, generally the aesthetic vibe of what's going on there. And so we're going to hit go, and then I'll come back once this has actually spun something up for us. And boom, out pops a pretty decent start for a series of different designs, all looking like a nice little vertical screen. And so this is a nice little pro tip, by the way. Inside of your prompt, tell it to simulate an iPhone device frame and tell it that you don't want scroll bars rendered. Now I know that it did it here, but we could get that removed. So that brings me to tip number 2, which is building a knowledge file. So this tip, honestly, I learned while I was researching this video specifically, and it is already paying dividends because I found myself always having to prompt Lovable to remember specific things that I wanted it to do. So every time I would tell it to go build a new feature, for example, I would have to re-prompt it with all of my design principles or else it wouldn't really be right. And so inside of a tool like Cursor or Windsurf, we have this capability, right? We can provide project rules or global rules that tell the system how to handle specific types of files or specific types of requests. And so knowledge files inside of Lovable are basically the same thing. And so all we need to do is click this plus button in the bottom left-hand corner, and then we click on knowledge. And then once we are in this screen, what we need to do is we need to just paste in whatever guidelines we have for the system. Now, some other stuff that you could add in here is like the specific typography considerations, color palettes, even the way certain transitions or animations are supposed to happen. You can add all of that in here. And so the real value here is that we don't need to constantly remind the system to follow certain instructions for us because that would honestly get super tedious. And so now we can just codify these high impact guidelines into the system and really focus on thinking through the changes that we want made functionally. And so for example, this is another version of those app screens that I built. We can look at them here for later features in this vibe planning process. And it's got some cool things so we can toggle between biased and unbiased headline variations. We can look at the facts of certain articles. We can look at a timeline of events. A lot of cool different things that we can do inside of here. But let's say now that we want to build out what the next feature is, right? So we came through our whole vibe planning process here where maybe I want to build the user profile settings now. And so I could just come through here and copy all of this, pop back over and say, I want to build the next feature. So we say, I'd like to build the next feature screen. Here's the details below. And now I know that it's going to actually follow those aesthetic guidelines that I had given to the system. But still, this brings us to a critical question. What happens if you don't do this? Well, that is exactly what I tried. So let me show you how it went. So tip number 3 is that with Lovable, I found that you want to emphasize design over functionality So here we're going to look at two different outputs that I got for the same exact series of features. And so this one was the first one where we focused on having it consider mostly just the design of the thing. So we gave it all of our design principles and had it focus on really just building what an interface for this might look like based on very specific principles of how we want things to look in the first place, right? So that example where I had the aesthetic guidelines and we gave it that whole prompt, that is what this version is. It's giving it the aesthetic guidelines where the functionality is secondary. But now if we look at our second option here, it kind of just doesn't look as good, right? This kind of looks like a super vanilla app. When I open the next screen up, it's just not as exciting. They have some like really ugly UI elements. But here's the thing is functionally, it technically kind of does all the same stuff, right? Both of these would enable a user to do the exact same things, right? You can look at key facts, how they're presented, the timeline of events, all of these sorts of things. But in one version, it looks kind of crappy, in my opinion. And in the other version, it looks pretty nice. And so the big piece of advice here is that when you're in that planning process, you need to really take time to think about each feature. Because I think what most of us would do in this same situation is that we would take this idea of like, hey, it needs to do this thing, right? I need to have this news feed that can scrub bias from a news article, right? And then I want to show a detailed view to somebody. And we think through, as like non-product designers, we think through what it will do, and we don't think through how it will make us feel as we're doing it. And that's what a great product designer does. And so the issue is that when we then go to Lovable and we just say like, here's all the things it does, just go build something that does this. Well, then Lovable is just going to do exactly that, especially if you have a very big feature and you're trying to get it to build functionality at the same time. It only has so much context. And so it's not going to spend a lot of its raw computing power designing you a thing that, for what it's worth, it doesn't even know what you want in the first place because you didn't take the time to tell it. And so it's really important that in that planning process, you really think through for each feature, like what might different animations look like in this thing? If a user long presses on it, what do I want to happen? Do I want the UI of it to change? Do I want it to do a little jiggle, right? If somebody hits a check mark, do I want to have some sort of success UI indicator? These little tiny things that we don't necessarily think about that you're not going to get out of a tool like Lovable if you don't ask in the planning process for the AI to think through each of these things and then give feedback to the system before you even pass it into your design tool. And so again, tip number 3, you want to think about form more than you do function, right? Function is coming in step 1 and step 2 and step 4. Step 3, where we're building out the design, it's a very critical stage and you want to dedicate specific resources to solving that problem contained like into itself. But if you want to really ramp that up, tip number 4 is for you, which is asking for multiple angles of the same concept. One of the things I've noticed as I use these tools like Lovable or anything for that matter is sometimes you'll run the same prompt too, like 3, 4, 5 times. You'll run it through the same exact prompt, but one of those prompts kind of wows you, whereas the others are like, take it or leave it, right? Like maybe you've seen that before, where one of the outputs is like, meh, but it's like you ran this thing through and then one of the outputs was just, it was really good. It made a really nice splash screen. It made a really nice user onboarding process, right? And you can never quite force it to replicate that every single time. Well, that happens because there's inherent randomness in language models. It's not really ever going to give you the same exact output every single time, especially not in a complicated task like this. So why not just ask it to give us multiple variations of the thing we want? And so here is our prompt. I need you to take the concept we had for this screen and give me 4 to 5 distinctly different concepts for it. Think of this like you're an expert product designer and you're tasked with coming up with different ways this thing could look. Each of them should be meaningfully different from each other and unique. To reiterate, here is the feature. And so what I did was I used their edit tool to select this specific container because I didn't like the way really that it did this audio briefing screen. I wasn't in love with it. And so I'm just going to ask it to go build me out a few different concepts of this piece. And so now we can see from our output, it gave us 4 different design concepts. So it did one that was like a podcast style player, a news radio dashboard, a magazine, and a voice assistant. So let's look at them real quick. So this is the podcast style iteration that it gave us. And so I kind of like how it did this chapters thing. It gives you like the different AI voice that the user could pick. Playback speed, download it for offline listening. I mean, this is pretty cool. If I was to get like my own daily news briefing, gives different chapters to it too. So I think this is pretty cool. If we go down to the radio, again, we can like listen to our brief. I do like how it chose to do this one with different categories. So this might be like my general morning brief, but then I have like stuff that I might care about in economic markets, maybe. Maybe it's niched down into certain types of things in the economy, tech stuff. So maybe this is like AI news or something like that. So I like how they did that. I also like how they did this schedule where it's like, hey, here's what your news is going to look like tomorrow. You're going to have your morning briefing at 7 a.m. So I do like the way they did some of this stuff. So I like certain components of this, and then I like certain components of this too. So I would probably look at how I might be able to combine both of those updates here, and then you can have conversations, which is kind of cool. So you can talk into it and ask questions about this story, and then it'll give you kind of follow-up answers. So that's kind of cool. It creates like a chat-like interface. So point being, we could see how those were like meaningfully different from each other. And if I was really going to do this, I would have spent a little bit more time maybe thinking through tiny aspects of what I might want it specifically to do in a certain direction. It also gave me, there was a step, I'll put it back up on screen here, where it gave me what the concepts were going to be. So it said, hey, here are the different concepts. If I didn't like one of these, I could have told it like, hey, I don't like concept 5. Like, can you do something else for that? And it would have gone out and done something different. And so we can pick the variation that we like, maybe pull components out of pieces of that, and then integrate it all into a cohesive thing that we actually like. So again, this is really great because we're like replicating what you might get from a product designer. If you had a product designer on your team, they would be giving you different looks at like what this feature could be. And then you can choose what you like about certain things and what you don't like about certain things, and then iterate on that until you have a product that you actually like. And you want to do all of this before you start to code the thing, because it would be stupid if we have a design that looks like we're going to need some piece of data. We go out, we build an endpoint for it, we do all this back-end work to have that data, and then it's like, oh, we did away with that in the design, so we don't need it, right? Then you just wasted a bunch of time. And so this all leads me very nicely to my last tip, which is with Lovable specifically, I like to design things screen by screen. And so one thing you need to critically understand when we're vibe coding is you're always battling the context. Language models have upper limits on how much they can take as an input and how much they can give you as an output, right? We all probably know this as a token. And so you need to make sure that when you're prompting the system, you're only ever giving it the context it actually needs to solve the problem you are asking it to solve. Everything else becomes signal noise, which can give you a worse output. And so one of the ways I do this is I always try to have the system design screen by screen. And so I'm not going to give it 15 screens to make at the same time. I'm going to go piece by piece. Here is how we do it. So we have our overall prompt, which we're kind of persona prompting it, saying, hey, you're a product designer. You use the inspiration images. Here are your aesthetic guidelines. Here are some different practicalities. And then we tell it, this is what you're building, right? You're building an app that does this thing. But here are the specific screens I want you to build. So I want you to build a splash screen for it, a home screen feed for it, and a detailed view of a screen where someone has just clicked into an article to read. And now you could come in here and give more detailed versions of what is really in that screen, and that's going to give you a more precise output. And now the reason, or another reason this is nice, is if we want to make like specific design changes, like say there was something about this deep research screen that I didn't like the way this looked, right? I thought this was too big or something. Well, then I can come through and just like very specifically edit that specific component within this specific screen. And so then when I pass that to the LLM and say, hey, make this change for me, It's again going to take the context of this specific div that I'm pointing at and any other context I give it and make just that change. And so this is huge, again, just to put a bow on it, because we can deal with the separation of concerns and use all of this good LLM stuff to really focus on like just building the design. I do not want a tool like Lovable trying to build me complicated back-end API integrations or services for pieces of my app. I do not want it doing that. It tends to be kind of good at doing designs, and so let's just have it do that. And so there you have it, 5 pretty dope tips that will help you churn out higher quality designs in Lovable, guaranteed. And so what do you do with it from here? Well, you can take all of these screens, you can export the code, and then you can pump it into that final stage of the 4-step process or whatever your process is, which is translating this now into functional code. So using like a Claude Taskmaster, for example, to take all of these screens and actually build them and start thinking through, what are my databases going to look like? What are my API endpoints going to look like? When do I need to do a create request? When do I need to make a read request? When do I need to make an update or delete? All of those sorts of things can be handled once we know what we actually need to be there in the first place. And so just a friendly reminder, I do have coming next week a 3 to 4 hour free tutorial where I'm going to show you that 4-step process in detail inside of my school group, where we go from concept fully through to designs in a tool like Lovable, and then get an actual output functioning app at the end. So that is it for this video. I will see you in the next one.